They said if you ever heard the dogs before you saw the men, it was already too late. In the dead of night, when the air hung thick and the trees barely moved, a mother ran through the swamp with her child pressed against her chest, praying that the darkness would choose her side. Behind her, lantern lights flickered like hungry eyes. The hunters were close, and what happened next would become a whisper carried through generations. A story of fear, faith, and something the slave catchers never believed in until it was too late. Tonight, on Night Archive, we step into the chilling legend of Zora, a mother who was hunted, cornered, and yet somehow escaped into the shadows, leaving grown men trembling at the edge of the woods. Before we go deeper, if stories like this, hidden histories, forgotten courage, and mysteries wrapped in the dark, pull you in, take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Night Archive. It truly helps the channel grow, and you won't want to miss the next story waiting in the dark. Now lower the lights and listen closely. It was sometime in the early 1800s, deep in the American South, where plantations stretched farther than hope. Zora was known among the enslaved community as quiet but observant. She listened more than she spoke. She remembered everything. And most of all, she protected her little boy, Samuel, with a quiet fierceness that others could feel without her saying a word. On the outside, she worked in the fields like everyone else. On the inside, she planned. Whispers had begun traveling between plantations, a small network, a hidden path through marshlands and thick forests, a chance at freedom. But escaping alone was one thing. Escaping with a child who could cry, stumble, or grow tired, that was something else entirely. And yet, Zora waited for the right night. That night came when the sky cracked open with thunder. Rain poured down hard enough to blur the world. The overseers rushed indoors. The dogs were chained tighter to keep them calm. And under that roaring storm, Zora made her move. She wrapped Samuel close, tied a small cloth bundle across her back, and slipped into the darkness beyond the cabins. For hours, she walked through mud and tangled roots. Every snap of a branch made her freeze. Every distant howl made her heart slam against her ribs. But the storm covered her tracks. The rain washed away her scent. It felt like the heavens themselves were giving her a head start. But storms do not last forever. By morning, the rain had stopped, and when her absence was discovered, the plantation erupted into chaos. Orders were shouted, horses were saddled, and 3 experienced slave hunters were called in. Men who prided themselves on never losing their prey. They brought trained dogs, rifles, and a confidence built on years of successful captures. They underestimated one thing. Zora was not running blindly. Long before that night, Zora had learned from the elders. In quiet corners, under breath and candlelight, she had listened to stories of roots and herbs, of protection charms, of something outsiders mocked but secretly feared. Hoodoo, not the dramatic illusions people imagine, but spiritual practices rooted in survival, strength, and belief. To the enslaved, it was a lifeline. To the hunters, it was superstition. As the men followed the trail toward the swamp, strange things began to happen. The dogs, usually aggressive and focused, began whining. One refused to move forward. Another barked wildly at nothing visible between the trees. The lead hunter cursed and pushed ahead, blaming the storm for confusing the scent. Meanwhile, Zora had reached the thickest part of the marshland. The air there was different, heavy, still, almost watchful. She moved carefully across fallen logs and shallow water, stepping where the ground was firmest. At one point, Samuel stirred and whimpered, exhausted. She knelt, held his face gently, and whispered words passed down to her, words meant to calm fear and call protection. Behind her, a sudden gunshot echoed. The hunters had found a piece of cloth torn from her bundle. Close, too close. They split up to surround the area, certain she was trapped between swamp and forest. But the swamp had its own rules. Thick fog began rolling in, though the sun was high. One of the men later swore the temperature dropped so fast he could see his breath. Another claimed he heard chanting, low and steady, though no one was nearby. As they pressed forward, one hunter's horse suddenly reared violently, throwing him into the mud. The animal refused to stand, eyes wide, trembling uncontrollably. The men argued, was it a snake? An alligator? Something unseen beneath the water. Zora kept moving. She reached a small island of dry land, hidden within the marsh. A place described to her months earlier by an older woman who had once tried to escape. If you reach the cypress with the split trunk, the woman had whispered, you'll find ground that remembers our footsteps. There, Zora paused just long enough to bury something small beneath the roots. A pouch filled with herbs, dirt from the cabin floor, and a strand of her son's hair. Protection, guidance, strength. She didn't wait to see if it worked. She simply believed it would. Back in the swamp, panic began creeping into the hunters' voices. One dog broke free and ran in circles before plunging into the water and disappearing completely. The men searched, called out, but the animal never resurfaced. Another hunter tripped over a root and gashed his arm badly enough to end the chase for him. Still, the leader refused to turn back. By nightfall, the fog thickened unnaturally. Lantern flames flickered and died without wind. The remaining men huddled together, suddenly unsure of their surroundings. Landmarks looked unfamiliar. Paths seemed to shift. One swore he saw a woman standing between the trees ahead, still, silent. But when they approached, no one was there. Fear does strange things to people who are used to being feared. Meanwhile, Zora had reached the far edge of the swamp. where a narrow creek flowed northward. If followed long enough, it would connect to a larger river rumored to lead toward free territory. She built a small raft from driftwood and vines she had prepared in advance, hands moving quickly despite exhaustion. As she pushed away from the shore with Samuel curled against her, she heard distant shouting. The hunters had reached the water's edge. One of them raised his rifle and fired toward the moving shape on the creek. The shot rang out, and then silence. The smoke cleared, but the raft was gone. No splash, no cry, no sign. The men searched the banks for hours. Nothing. Days later, only one of the original hunters returned to the plantation. Mud-streaked, pale, and quieter than before. He refused to speak about what happened in detail, only muttered that the swamp was cursed, that the woman they chased was not alone. Zora, according to whispered accounts, made it north. Some say she joined a free black community near the border. Others say she continued further, changing her name, raising her son in safety. What is known is this: no record of her capture was ever filed. No body was found. No proof of failure was admitted by the men who hunted her. But among enslaved communities, her story spread like wildfire. They spoke of the mother who outran dogs, the woman who called the fog, the hunters who lost their courage in the dark. And whether every detail was literal or layered in symbolism, one truth remained: belief gave strength where chains tried to take it away. And here, where it gets even more interesting. Years later, travelers passing through that same swamp reported strange occurrences. Sudden cold patches, sounds of distant singing at dusk, hunters avoiding certain paths altogether. The land itself seemed to guard something sacred. Was it coincidence? Fear playing tricks on memory? Or did Zora's desperate prayers leave an imprint that lingered? On Night Archive, we don't just look at history, we listen to the echoes between the facts. Hoodoo was never about spectacle. It was about resilience, about using what little you had to create protection in a world designed to break you. Imagine the courage it took to run knowing the punishment if caught. Imagine the strength to carry a child through miles of swamp, while men on horseback closed in. And imagine the calm required to whisper protective words instead of surrendering to panic. Every 20 or 30 seconds of that journey could have ended differently. A snapped twig, a crying child, a clear sky instead of rain. But survival often balances on the smallest moments. What truly frightened the hunters may not have been magic in the dramatic sense. It may have been the realization that their control had limits, that the land did not always obey them, that the people they saw as powerless carried unseen weapons, knowledge, faith, unity. And that realization is powerful. Zora's story reminds us that resistance took many forms. Some fought openly, some sabotaged quietly, some ran, and some, like Zora, blended strategy with spirituality, turning fear into fuel. As you sit here listening, think about how many names like hers were never written down. How many escapes were dismissed as rumor because admitting them meant admitting vulnerability. That's why we tell these stories, because somewhere, generations later, her courage still moves through the air when her story is spoken. And maybe that's the real magic. If this story moved you, if Zora's escape made you pause and imagine that dark swamp and the sound of those distant dogs, take a moment to share this video with someone who appreciates hidden history. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you believe the hunters experienced something supernatural? Or was it fear unraveling their confidence? I read your comments, and your thoughts always shape what we explore next here on Night Archive. Stories like this survive because they are told, because someone refuses to let them fade. And as long as we keep listening, the echoes will never disappear. Until next time, stay curious and stay aware of the stories history tried to bury in the dark.